Hi everyone, I hope you're doing good. My name is Anubhav and I'm super excited and glad to welcome you back to my YouTube channel. This series we are focusing on deployments and Docker deployments in more specificity. And if you're following along from the last lecture, you remember that in the last video, we had a Flask application for which we created a Docker image. We then proceeded to create a Docker container with that image and saw if it was working fine or not. Once we got the confirmation that things are looking good, we then pushed that image to a Docker hub. This is what we covered in the last video lecture. In this lecture, we are moving towards the actual thing, that is deploying this specific Docker image to an EC2 instance. So without much of a ado, I will directly go to the coding parts or the hands-on section where I will showcase you how do you deploy a Dockerized image, or how do you deploy a Docker image to a EC2 instance so that it is visible to the outside world and anybody can access the specific application that you have been working upon. So yeah, let's get started. So if you remember, this was the image that I was talking about. The name of my image was git auto commit, as you can see from over here, and we had pushed a tag called git auto commit v1, which is also visible in my Docker hub. So yeah, the steps are very simple. You just need to build an image. Once you have built that image, you need to authorize Docker hub, and then there are two commands. One is docker tag and docker push, which pushes this image to your Docker hub. Now this image, because it's in a public repository which is called git auto commit, like it is accessible for anyone to pull, and we can create the Docker containers with this specific image and things should be working fine. So I hope everything is clear over here. I will now proceed to go to my AWS account, and over there I will create an EC2 instance and do the rest of the things so that it's very clear for you. So yeah, let's get started. So as you can see, I'm in my AWS console homepage, and over here you would see variety of services listed down. So yeah, it's the one that you have recently visited. Maybe if you're opening AWS for the first time, you would not find some of these listed here because obviously you have not been into these services, but you can always search for EC2 instance above here as well. So you can just write EC2, and this is the first thing that would come up, which is virtual servers in cloud, which is EC2, right? So what I will do is I will go ahead and click on this specific button, and as you can see, like, this is what my view would look like. So a thing to note over here is that it's very important that you choose a specific region. So AWS has data centers in regions across the world. So I would recommend that you choose a data center which is nearer to you, because number one, it also has impacts on the pricing, and number two, because the latency, if you're far away from a data center, like if let's say you have chosen a data center in US, and if you're located, let's say, based out of Vietnam, that because the distance is more, the latency is more, and hence like your application will be comparatively slower. It's always recommended that you pick up the data center which is nearest to you. In my case, I am picking up a data center. I mean, I'm running an EC2 instance in the region of Tokyo, which is AP Northeast 1. You can actually click on this and view all the available regions. So let's say if you're based in Thailand, if you're based in India, I would suggest that you use Mumbai or Hyderabad. Maybe if you're based out of Thailand, I would suggest you use Singapore. If you are in Australia, Sydney would be the one that is nearest to you. So yeah, I mean, depends upon that, but always prefer the one which is nearer to you. So yeah, once you're inside the EC2 menu, what you have to do is you have to go and click on instances running, right? You can always close that, it does not matter. But over here, what you will see is you will find a button called launch instance, and this is what we need to do. So what you mean by launch instance? Launch instance means that this specific button will create a EC2 instance, or let's say a personal computer or a personal server, whatever you would like to call it, in this specific AWS region with all the specifications that you give, which is operating system, memory, and all those stuff. So yes, there is free tier of AWS EC2. I think it should be visible once you're inside the launch instance menu. But as I have said previously as well in my last video lecture, because I've exhausted the free tier limit, it does not matter for me. But yeah, if you are going to AWS for the first time, I would suggest you use the free tier, because above all you're practicing, so it would not cost you anything. So that would make more sense for you. But if you are a pro or an expert, I hope you know what you are doing. So I will leave that on your better judgment. So yeah, let's click on this thing called launch instance. If you go to launch instance, you would see like it asks me to give a name to this specific thing, and to the specific machine, I will say I will call it git auto commit machine, right? And then it tells me, okay, which is the What is the operating system that I would need to choose? Would I choose an Ubuntu based image, or would I choose a Microsoft based image? And I think you also have a Mac. You should also have a Mac OS based image. Yeah, you have that as well. Or you want a AWS Linux based image and all those stuff, right? Like, what kind of operating system in general do you want? So I mean, Ubuntu, I think, is considered as a free tier. None of these, like even Mac OS, Windows, and all these, are not free tier based images. So what I will do is I will choose, or I will go ahead to go with Ubuntu, because yeah, Ubuntu is more easier to use. It's more fun. Otherwise, if you're a pro and if you know what you're doing, you can also go with Red Hat or Debian, or whatever you like. Microsoft, Windows and Mac OS, I would not recommend choosing, because number eight, it costs money, and number second, like in Windows specific, it's more difficult to have a command line interface, like controlling stuff with that. So I would not actually prefer that. Mac is still better. But anyways, I'm going with a Ubuntu based image, which means my operating system would be Ubuntu. And if you see over here, it tells me like what is the volume, and like this is running on 24.04 LTS version, right? SSD volume type, which is free tier eligible. This one also is a free tier eligible one, but if you choose any of the rest, right, like these are not free tier eligible, and hence like these are not free tier eligible, hence it will cost you money. So yeah, going with this specific image, and architecture, I will choose at 64-bit ARM. The reason being, I am currently like on Mac M3. Sorry, I am currently on Mac M2, which essentially means that the image that I have generated, the Docker image that I have generated, was built using the Mac M2 architecture, which is ARM based architecture. So my image is of that specific kind. So if I choose x86, which is 64-bit x86 processor, my image is not compatible, the one that I have uploaded on Docker Hub, and hence like I would get a lot of warnings or maybe errors as well. Hence, to solve this, I am going with a 64-bit architecture, which is equivalent to my Mac M2 based architecture, right? The new M1, M2 chips. So that is something that you would need to keep in mind if you were following this tutorial from a Mac M1, M2, M3 based chips. In case you're doing it from an Intel based computers or Intel based PCs, you can always choose 64-bit x86 processors. So again, repeating this, if you are on anything other than Mac M1, M2, M3 processors, choose x86-bit, otherwise go with 64-bit ARM processors. So yeah, then it tells me, okay, like how this machine looks like. This is a T4 nano instance, T4G nano instance, which has two core CPUs, 0.5 gigabytes of memory, which means 500 MBs of memory, right? And it's the current generation processor. So yeah, I think that should be okay for us, because we are not running anything heavy. So that is all right. Then it tells me what should be the key value pair. So you need to understand that this is a remote system, right? And you would need to connect to a remote system to, like, let's say, install Docker or do any stuff, maybe even updating your system. So you have two ways to actually connect with it. One is using a PEM file, right, which is like the key pair recommended login method, or which is also you call as SSH based method, right? So you always have a public, let's say, name to this specific machine. You have a PEM file, you can SSH into the instance and do all the stuff. This is the recommended method, but AWS UI interface also gives you this specific method to directly SSH into the instance without like having the PEM file and all in mind. So I would actually go with that. So I will say proceed without a key value pair, which they say is not recommended. But in case like you want to like SSH directly to the machine using from your machine, like from your host machine, without going to the AWS instance or AWS UI, you can always like select a key value pair, create the key value pair, download the PEM file, and then do that. But not something that I am doing. This is directly like, so I will be going to AWS UI. I will be directly connecting to that machine. There's a different way of connection as well, which is the SSH based instance, which uses a .pem file and all that stuff. So not going into that details because that's outside the scope of this lecture. Then you have something called network settings, where you have like VPCs group. So VPC is virtual private cloud. Again, not specifically covering in this video lecture, because VPC, subnets, public subnet, private subnet, these are different topics in itself. I think you can always watch along some few tutorials on YouTube to get the idea on that. But just to let you know, there's always a default VPC, which is virtual private cloud, created by Amazon, which, like, once you create an AWS account, that is always by default created by Amazon. So I would be using a VPC, and inside there a public subnet. So, and then it tells me, do you want to allow SSH traffic, do you want to allow HTTPS traffic, and do you want to allow HTTP traffic or not? So I will say yes, I should be able to SSH as in going into the instance from anywhere on the internet, and that is why 0.0.0 is the IP. I should also allow inbound and outbound traffic for HTTPS, and also the same for HTTP traffic, right? And then it tells me, okay, this is the root volume and all that stuff. Again, not important for you to know. The only important thing for you to know is like giving a name to this specific system, choosing a image, choosing an operating system, which is Ubuntu in my case, right? Changing the architecture, and then like ticking all the boxes which says that you should be able to SSH anywhere from the instance, allowing HTTP traffic, allowing HTTPS traffic as well. If you are a bit pro, you know what these three things means, as in like obviously you should not be doing anywhere, because if you are a pro, you know that you should not be doing anywhere, because allowing SSH traffic from anywhere in the internet is like a big security risk, and it's a big no. But we are not focused on that, because for us the main goal is to like deploy your Dockerized application in EC2 instance so that it is visible to anyone on the internet. This is our main goal. In case you are more interested in security and all those stuff, like the very nitty-gritty details of AWS, let me know. I might create a separate video on that. But yeah, it also tells you the same thing which I was saying, that the security group, like, it should not be like that. But if you are doing something like this, you should know what are the risks associated with it. So yeah, all good then. What we will do is, now we will click on launch instances, and I think it takes around 4-5 minutes for the instances to be completely launched, up and running. You can always go back to EC2 instances and see like what is the status. So I think it's still not up. Let me just refresh this. Yeah, so this is the one that I had just started, which is called get auto commit. This has an instance ID. The status is showing running, and then the status check is still getting initialized, which means it's doing a health check and all those stuff, right? I will actually go to this instance, and it will show you what is the public IPv4 address for this box, what is the private IPv4 address for this box, what's the auto assigned public IP, what is the VPC ID, what is the subnet ID, what is the instance type, and all those specific nitty-gritty details. Correct? So all good. Now, if you want to connect to this machine, and we would need to connect to this machine because we would need to install Docker, and then we should be able to pull the image using Docker and Docker Hub, right? So Docker by default is not installed on any of the machines, on any of the Ubuntu machines. So obviously you would need to install that Docker, so that Docker command is accessible. So which essentially means you would need to connect to this specific instance. So as I told you, one way of connecting is having a PEM file, that is setting up a key value pair and then connecting from your host machine. The second is via Amazon UI, which I am going to showcase you over here. And this button is called the connect instance, or the connect button. You should go to EC2 instance connect, say I want to connect via public IP, and connect using EC2 instance connect, and click on connect. So now it will open up the EC2 instance terminal for you. So now actually you are inside the machine, right? That the EC2 instance that you just created, and you also have the full control to the terminal. So as I was saying you, that EC2 instance or EC2 machine is like your own personal computer, personal server. You could do anything that you want, or that you could do on your host machine. The same thing could be done in this machine as well, right? Because I now have the access to this specific terminal for this machine, right? And my first step would actually be installing Docker. And to install Docker on Ubuntu is very simple. I will actually follow the official steps. So you could always write, you can always go to Google and write installing Docker on Ubuntu, right? go to the first link that comes up, and it tells you, okay, these are the steps that you need to follow. Down over here, you would have a list of commands that you would need to copy and paste. So the first is sudo apt get update. So I will go to my instance, I will write sudo apt get update. It will like update all the required packages for me. So yeah, takes a bit of time, maybe around a minute or so. Meanwhile, if you have any doubts or questions, do let me know. I hope I'm not going too fast, and it's like easily understandable. So yeah, it will take up some time to download all these resources for me, and once downloaded, I can go back and use a second command, which is installing C certificates and curls. So I will just keep this command copied, and once done, I will also paste this command. So yeah, the first command has successfully done running. I will install, or I will rather run the second one, which says that because it will install something, so do you want to give this sufficient space? I will click on yes, and then it will also get installed. I will copy the third command, which is like getting the key rings and all those stuff. Obviously, if you want to read a bit more on what these specific commands are doing, you can always go back to this page and read, like the complete details have been over there. But again, my goal is not to go much into details, but rather showcase you deploying a Dockerized container on an EC2 instance. So yeah, the third one is also done running. I will copy the fourth one. These should be very quick actually. Yep, and followed by the fifth command, followed by the third last command actually. So doing like this, and again I have to do sudo apt get update, copy, paste, again updating stuff, and the last one is the one that actually installs Docker. So yeah, this is the command that will actually install Docker for you. So yeah, I will just paste this, and this will install Docker. It will ask that it requires around 384 MB. I am okay to give that space. I will click on yes, and then in a bit, maybe around 1 minute or so, your Docker will be done installing. So yeah, let's just wait for it. Yep, so now my Docker is done installing. Because my Docker is done installing now, what I'll be doing is I'll be pulling that specific image and building a container from that. So you know that I have already like uploaded my image on the Docker hub. So I would just need to use the Docker run command, which will like create the container from me from the pulled image, and then I should be able to access the specific image. This is what you are thinking, and this is absolutely correct. But the only point being, if you remember, we had exposed port 3009. If I go back to my code, you would remember that I'm using the port 3009 over here, correct? And I've also exposed that on my Docker file. So this tells that this tells to the Docker file that you need to expose port 3009. And because EC2 is a highly secured environment, all the ports on the specific machines are not open. So yeah, I like when, if you remember the Docker run command, I was doing a port mapping of port 3009 to port 3009 of Docker, which means port 3009 of my host machine to port 3009 of the Docker container. But on this host machine, which currently is my EC2 instance, the port 3009 is not open. So what I would need to do is I would go ahead and open this specific port for the inbound traffic, right? So I will go and I will go to EC2. I will go to this instance is running, which is 1. I will click on it. I will go to security, right? I will click on this security group, right? It will show me there is a security group attached to it. And what I will do is I will click on edit security groups. So, yep, click on this. It tells me there is an inbound rule, and if you remember, like while we were creating the EC2 instance, right, it asks me if I want SSH traffic or not, if I want HTTP traffic or not, or if I want HTTPS traffic or not, and we had right ticked, or we had like ticked on all the 3 instances, and hence like you see these ports are by default open for us. So SSH on port 22, HTTPS on port 443, and HTTP on port 80. So these are open for us, but we would also want to open port 3009 because that is where our Dockerized application would be running, and would also be mapping that to our port on the host system, the port 3009. So that is why I would need to open port 3009 on my EC2 instance as well. So we'll go ahead and say add a rule. Over here I will say custom TCP. The port range you know is 3009. I will say the source is custom and allow traffic from anywhere. this 0.0.0/0 means anywhere from all IPs, and then I would say save rules. So what it will do is it will like also open port 3009 on my EC2 instance. I did not need to do it on my local machine because for me port 3009 was already open on my local machine while I was running it locally, like Docker container running locally, but for EC2 that was not open, and hence I would need to do that. So yeah, I hope that is the explanation is enough for you. I will go back and connect again. And once I connect, right now, Docker is up and running. You have installed Docker, you have opened port 3009. So now it should be a very simple game for us, correct? Like we should be now be able to deploy the application, should be up and running, and then we should be able to access it. So what I will do is I will do sudo su. I will write docker run -d because I want to run it in detached mode, -p, followed by your port mapping. So 3009 is the port that I just opened, and I also want it to be mapped with 3009 of the Docker image or the Docker container, followed by the name of the container, which should be git auto commit container, followed by the name of the image, which is Anubhav 83, followed by git auto commit v1. So yeah, what it will do is it will first check if this image is existing locally or not, and because obviously it's not existing locally, it will pull this image from the Docker hub from us, and then it will proceed to create that specific container. And once that container is up and running, we should be able to access the specific website that we have created. So yeah, let's just click on this, and you will see it says this image does not exist locally, so it would pull up it from the Docker hub, and you see it's pulling these images from the Docker hub, and download is complete, and then you should see that the container is now up and running. So if you do docker ps, you know that this container is now up and running because it says that the status is up and up for 7 seconds and all those stuff. So now if you were on your host system, right, like if let's say if you're on a local machine, what would you do? You would do localhost followed by port 3009, and then this page should open, and that is how it work, right? But now because this specific EC2 instance is a IPv4 already, public IPv4 already exposed, so you should be able to connect to this machine using this public IP, right? So if you go over here to this instance ID, you would see there is a public IPv4 address for this machine. So this tells us this is where this machine is accessible, and because this machine is accessible, this is where your containers is running as well. So you should be able to access the specific website that you have deployed on this public IP, right? Because that is now your server. Earlier your local machine or your host machine was your server, and that is why you used to refer it as localhost, or let's say 127.0.0.1, right? Now it has been replaced with EC2 instance, which has a specific public IP, and that is where your code is running. So what you should do is you should click on the specific IP, copy this. So this is IP that is there. What you should now do is you should go open an incognito instance, write HTTP, because again we are not on secured protocol, and if you remember, that is why we also open the port 80, because it shall allow the HTTP connection as well, followed by the IP that you had just copied, which was the specific IP, followed by 3009. So I hope this should now open this specific website which is running, or a Dockerized container which is running, or a EC2 instance. Let's see if this works or not, and I'm pretty sure and I hope this would work. So yeah, it tells me this website is not secured because obviously this is not HTTPS connection. I would say continue to this site, and boom, things are working. And that is what we wanted, right? Like we wanted to deploy our Dockerized containers or our Dockerized app to a EC2 instance so that it is visible to the outside world. Now, if someone says like, or if you want to share your specific application, let's say you have made this specific application and you want to share this with your friends, or let's say with recruiters or someone, you always give them this link and say, this is where my deployed application lives. You can always go and check it out. So, and that is how they would be able to access it. I know you would have a question that generally the addresses are like more like, let's say, www.amazon.com/some product, or www.https www.myhome my home.xyz, something like that, but you have an IP over here. So isn't that a bit strange? Like, people would not remember your IP. If you say someone, let's say the name of this website was doing something.com, people would remember that, but they would not remember this specific IP. So it's a bit of a honky donkey situation out there. And to answer your question, yes, like obviously people would not remember your IP. So you have something called Route 53 and Amazon, which is the DNS resolver. Like, you could always purchase a domain name, give the specific IP to that domain name, and a mapping would be created, and you can always share that specific thing. Again, that's a topic for a different discussion, but you can always do that. I know this is not the most human readable format. There is also, like, if you go to this EC2 instance, right? There's also something called a I think it should come over here. Like, it also has a public URL. I think that should be present, which is AWS EC2, something like that. So yeah, public IPv4 DNS, right? So you could also try with this if it's accessible or not, and I think it should be. But let's see. Yep, something like this. So not entirely sure. HTTP HTTP dot 3009. Oh yeah, it's I am not sure if this works or not. I don't think this specifically works, but yeah, maybe we would need some routing and more to do this, but I hope you get my point, right? Like, playing with a, like, deploying your containers on an EC2 instance, your Dockerized container on EC2 instance. Obviously, the next step, that is the Route 53 or the DNS mapping and all, we can cover in the next lectures. But this is the most easiest way to deploy your Dockerized container onto the EC2 instance so that it is visible to the outside world. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You were able to learn a lot. And I sincerely hope that for whatever reasons you were watching this tutorial, that is fulfilled. If you like this one, please do like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you have a good day ahead. See you soon. Till then, goodbye and take care.